She stood there in the dust, barely clothed, shaking so hard her legs nearly gave way. The sun over the Montana fields burned fiercely, yet Clara's skin looked pale and ashen, as if the warmth couldn't touch her at all. Her ripped blouse stuck to her like damp cloth, and the dirt on her calves mingled with dried blood. 3 farmhands circled her, chuckling darkly, nudging her toward the weathered wooden wall of the cattle shed. One of them pushed her arm, and her voice finally broke like brittle glass. "Don't make me strip, please." Her words lingered in the heavy air, frail and raw, as if the whole prairie hushed to hear her plead for mercy. Clara was only 20, frail from months of grueling work and barely enough to eat. She'd been hauled out here after being accused of stealing grain she never laid a hand on. The men wanted amusement, not truth. They wanted to humiliate her until she shattered. Her hands gripped the torn cloth at her waist, clinging to what little pride she had left, but her fingers trembled. Her eyes scanned the farmyard, searching for help, for anyone who'd see her as a person, not a plaything. Then boots crunched on the ground behind the shed. Slow, heavy, purposeful. The kind of step that made even heartless men stop talking. Amos Reed stepped into the scene without a word, and the air seemed to thicken around him. At 55, he was weathered like the plains themselves. Broad frame, dusty jacket, eyes toughened from years under the open sky. A man who rarely spoke loudly, but never backed down when he saw something wrong. He took in the moment without flinching. A terrified girl clutching a torn blouse, 3 grown men looming over her, and the faint echo of her plea still hanging in the silence. For a moment no one moved. Then Amos stepped forward. Just one step, but it made the farmhands twitch. He didn't yell. He didn't swear. He just let his voice hit like a stone. "Step back." The men hesitated, then slunk away grumbling under their breath as they headed toward the fence. Clara tried to cover herself, too ashamed to meet his gaze. Amos slipped off his jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders, not touching her, not staring, just offering warmth she'd forgotten existed. For the first time in days, her breathing steadied. She looked at him through strands of hair clinging to her face, wondering what kind of man would show kindness in a place where kindness was nearly gone. But Amos wasn't a hero. Not yet. He was just a man who'd seen enough cruelty to know when a line had been crossed. And Clara, trembling inside his jacket, had no idea this single moment would change both their lives forever. If this was only the start of her pain, what kind of truth lay waiting beyond the horizon? Clara could still feel the weight of Amos's jacket on her shoulders as he led her across the yard. Not touching, just walking close enough so she didn't feel alone. The heat of the late Montana afternoon pressed down. Yet somehow she felt warmer in that jacket than she had in years. He pushed open the door of a small shed behind his cabin. It was plain, dusty, with a narrow cot and a wooden stool, but to Clara, it felt like a haven. She stepped inside slowly, her bare feet leaving faint prints on the wooden floor. Amos set a pail of warm water near the cot, then placed a folded linen dress beside it. The dress was worn but clean. Clara touched the fabric with shaking fingertips, as if the fabric might disappear if she held it too tightly. She stood there still wrapped in the jacket, too scared to take it off, even in safety. Her voice was barely a murmur. "I didn't take anything." Amos looked at her with that steady gaze of his. "I believe you." He said it so plainly, so simply, as if the truth didn't need embellishment for a girl who'd spent years being doubted, blamed, and bartered like a trinket. Hearing someone say, "I believe you," felt like rain after a long drought. He pulled out a stool and sat with a weary sigh. His hands were rough from years of farm work, yet his voice was gentler than she'd expected. Amos nodded toward the pail. "Clean up when you're ready. You can bolt the door from inside. No one will trouble you here." That last sentence hit her harder than anything. No one will trouble you. She almost couldn't believe it. The world she came from never let a girl feel safe, but here in this quiet shed, with the soft breeze from the window carrying the scent of sagebrush, she felt something she hadn't felt since childhood. Hope. It was small, delicate, almost too faint to grasp, but it was there. That evening, Amos left a plate of biscuits outside her door. He didn't knock. He just set it down and walked away. Clara opened the door a sliver and saw the plate sitting alone on the step, with the warm glow of the sunset behind it. The first night she only stared at the food, barely eating a crumb, afraid kindness always came with a cost. The second night, she opened the door just enough to whisper a quiet thank you. Her voice so soft it nearly vanished in the breeze. By the third morning she dared to sit at the table with Amos, still silent, still cautious, but willing to stay for breakfast. That small bravery was the first real step toward trusting again. But hope has a way of stirring old fears. That night Clara awoke gasping, the echo of rough hands and mocking laughter still clinging to her mind. She sat upright, trembling so hard the blanket slipped from her shoulders. Through the thin door she saw a faint glow. Amos was sitting on the porch, smoking quietly, keeping watch without a word. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the dark. If Amos was kind, what was the real price of staying here? If someone finally treated her like a person, what would happen when her past caught up with her again? Clara woke early the next morning, long before the sun stretched across the Montana sky. She sat on the small cot, holding the linen dress Amos had given her, wondering if a simple piece of clothing could truly mark a new start. The farm was quiet, peaceful, in a way her past had never been. But peace doesn't erase memories. Sometimes it pulls them closer. When she stepped outside, Amos was already by the fence, mending a broken rail. He looked up and gave her a small nod, the kind of older men give when they see someone trying their best to keep it together. Clara walked closer, the morning breeze lifting her hair. Her voice quivered as she spoke. "Amos, I need to tell you something." He leaned on the fence, arms crossed, waiting without a hint of judgment in his eyes. That was all she needed. The words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. She told him about her father losing everything, about being sold to a tavern owner in Billings, and about the night she scrubbed floors until her hands bled, and about Silas Kane, the man who claimed to own her debt, a man who treated her life like a ledger he could pass to anyone. Amos listened in a way most folks never do. Silent, steady, present. When she finished, she could barely breathe, as if speaking it aloud made the past real again. Amos pushed his hat back and let out a long sigh. "That man's hurt more than just you." Clara blinked, caught off guard. Amos continued. "He's been running his own little kingdom of fear out here, and I've looked the other way too long." He looked down at his hands for a moment, his voice rough with something deeper. "Silas once pulled my son from a fire last summer. I thought I owed him. But a debt doesn't mean letting a man harm whoever he pleases." That was the first time Clara realized Amos carried his own guilt, not for what he'd done, but for what he hadn't stopped. There was a weight in his shoulders when he said it, as if the whole prairie had settled on him. Then Amos straightened, as if deciding something right there in the morning light. "We're riding into Billings. We'll talk to the sheriff. You're not hiding anymore." Clara's heart pounded. Facing her past terrified her, but running from it forever felt worse. She nodded slowly, and Amos gave her that same quiet nod he'd given before. Only this time, it meant something bigger. It meant he believed her. It meant he'd stand with her. As they saddled the horses, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child, sitting by her mother's old hearth. Courage, small and shaky, but real. Right before they rode out, she glanced back at the little shed behind the cabin. It was strange how safety could be found in the simplest places. Now she wondered if she'd ever feel that safe again once they stepped into that unpredictable town. And this brings me to a small request. If you're listening to this story right now, take a moment, sip your warm coffee, let your shoulders relax a little, and tell me what time it is and where you're listening from. And if this story moves you even a little, go ahead and hit subscribe so you can ride along with us in the next chapters. The ride into Billings took most of the afternoon, and by the time Amos and Clara returned to the farm, the sky was turning the color of embers. They'd spoken to the sheriff, laid out the truth, and watched Silas's name go from quiet gossip to official trouble. But trouble never stays still, especially not the kind Silas carried like a second skin. The farm grew quiet as evening settled. Clara sat on the porch steps, rubbing her hands together, feeling the weight of what she'd shared that morning. Amos stood near the fence, checking the gate latch for the third time. Clara noticed him glancing toward the dark line of pines at the far end of the property. She stepped closer. "Are you expecting something?" Amos didn't answer right away. He just chewed on the inside of his cheek, thinking. Silas isn't the type to let things go. Men like him see truth as a challenge, and challenges make them reckless. Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The sheriff had promised to look into it, but Billings' law was thin, stretched across too many miles. Men like Silas always found the cracks to slip through. Night fell fast, the way it does on the plains. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and the faint call of an owl somewhere beyond the shed. Clara was about to go inside when she spotted something. In the distance, a faint glimmer, a flicker, like moonlight on steel. Amos saw it too. He stepped in front of Clara, his body tense, his voice low. "Get inside now." But Clara couldn't move. Her legs froze, her breath caught in her chest. Out of the shadows came the sound of horses, slow at first, then sharper. Clara knew the rhythm of those hooves too well. Silas and his men. Amos grabbed his rifle from the porch rail. He didn't shout or panic. He just stood tall, facing the men who thought they could own fear. The lantern by the shed door cast long shadows across the dirt, stretching Amos's silhouette until he looked like part of the land itself. Silas rode in with a crooked smirk, the kind a man wears when he thinks the night is already his. He dismounted with a thud and pointed at Clara. "I came to take what's mine." Clara stepped back, her breath trembling, but Amos didn't budge. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd decided to end something for good. "You chose the wrong night to come here." And right as Silas's hand reached for her arm, a lantern swung open from the darkness behind the shed. But what exactly appeared in that moment, and how it changed everything, is a truth you'll want to hear in the next part. The night seemed to hold its breath as Silas stepped closer, expecting fear to grip everyone in sight. But fear is a strange thing. Sometimes it breaks you. Sometimes it wakes you up. And for Clara, in that exact second, something inside her finally stirred. Sheriff Caleb stepped out, his boots crunching on the dry dirt, his badge catching the faint glow of the flame. He'd followed Amos home, worried Silas might come looking for trouble, and he was right. Silas froze. His men shifted uneasily, their bravado fading like dust in the wind. The sheriff raised his hand, steady and calm. "You boys picked the wrong farm to creep up on." Amos lowered his rifle slightly, but his eyes stayed fixed on Silas. Clara stood behind him, breath shaky, but steady enough to stay upright. The sheriff laid out the charges, from crooked debts to threats made on farm property. And the moment Silas realized no one was shielding him anymore, his shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him like water from a crack bucket. He was done, truly done. The sheriff cuffed him, and the night grew quiet again. The kind that comes after a long-held storm finally passes. Clara stood there, the cool air brushing her face, feeling a freedom she'd almost forgotten existed. Not the kind you dream of when you're young and hopeful, a heavier freedom, hard-won. Amos placed a gentle hand near her shoulder, not touching, just letting her know he was there. "You did good." His voice cracked a little, as if he surprised even himself. Clara looked up at him, and for the first time, she let herself truly breathe, deep, slow, alive. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the farm like a gift. Clara stepped onto the porch, listening to the birds and the soft creak of the windmill. The world felt different now, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally believed she had a place in it. Amos sat nearby with a cup of coffee, watching the day settle in. He didn't say much. As days passed, Clara found herself tending the horses, planting sage by the window, and laughing in ways she thought she'd lost forever. Life didn't magically fix itself, it simply began again. And maybe that's the lesson here. But there's always a moment, small and fragile, when courage returns if you let it. Today, was there a moment in this story that touched your heart? And in your own life, are you standing still, or are you standing back up again? If this story brought you even a little warmth, please tap the like button. And if you want more stories that touch the heart and remind us we're not alone out here, go ahead and subscribe. Now tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you?